This is The Antidote with Dave Hawkins, where Christian music doesn't suck.
It's hard to imagine this place without the snow, and I have not even been here in the winter. St. Gertrude's out the window, see the heat begin to grow between what I see and what I know. I am lost. I am lost without you.
The Antidote is back with another night of Christian music that doesn't suck. Lost was our opening song of the night, and it gives a great idea of the art of the San Diego-based Tyson Motsenbocker. And that song comes from his new full-length Letters to Lost Loves. And you know, I hate to rate artists based on their conversation skills, but tonight's chat with Tyson is as excellent as his music. And during our talk, we covered a wide range of topics, going all the way from good versus bad in music, World War I, a literal life on the road, but more importantly, the effect of grief and loss in a person's life. The first part of our chat with Tyson is coming up along with one of his earlier songs, Footfalls. Enjoy. Tooth and Nail Records' newest artist is singer-songwriter Tyson Motsenbocker. Good to have you here on The Antidote, Tyson.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dave.
I have to tell you, I was surprised with you getting signed to Tooth and Nail. Because, I mean, most of their artists fit into the rock genre.
Yeah.
But with you being a singer-songwriter, have you found that to be an odd fit?
I was really surprised when we got interest from them. Because I had this album done for a little over a year before we even started shopping it to record labels. And so when we got interest from Tooth and Nail, you know, I grew up listening to Tooth and Nail bands and stuff, and I'm from Washington State, which is where they're based, and so I was really surprised, but it ended up being a kind of really fun and unusual fit with them. So,
well, that's interesting though. They did show that interest in you.
Yeah,
because it is such a break, but I don't know, maybe Tooth and Nail itself is changing a bit.
Yeah, that's kind of true a little bit. I mean, looking back, you know, they did some of the early Pedro the Lion records, and they did a Damien Jurado record, I think. So I know that they've done stuff like this in the past, but it's been a while, like a long while. So yeah, it's really neat that they showed that interest.
You're far from a newcomer in the music scene. You've recorded a pair of EPs, Until It Lands in 2010, and 3 years later, Rivers and Roads. How different are those recordings from your new release, Letters to Lost Loves?
Yeah, well, so the first EP that I made was the one that you talked about called Until It Lands. That one was a lot more of like kind of a classic indie rock record. And I did that one just kind of like, we just did that kind of like out of somebody's garage. Like we tracked that one kind of like piece by piece over a little bit of time. And then the second one was, after I made it Until It Lands, it was like, or I guess it was just my realization that making things is hard. Like making good stuff is really hard to do. And a few months after I made that first EP, and I was like a little bit disenfranchised with it. I was like, this isn't communicating what I thought that it was communicating at the time, or I'm not as happy with it now as I was then or whatever. And so I really struggled making the second one. That's why there was a few years in there where I was like making things and destroying them, and then making new stuff and destroying it. And so I think when I finally got that thing out, it just felt good to be like, okay, like you just kind of just need to be making things. You got to keep moving forward. And so that was what the second EP was.
Soft farewell to the summer. I found the water in the graying of the air, like a fire burning cold, fleeting glances on the side of the road. I never asked you for a song, or even a smile, darling, only hold me near. 'Cause I've been known to feel relief when the next one says she's moving on. So breathe deep, slow footfalls towards the next new year. I'll visit all my safest places to find it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. Do you feel weighed down? I can't compare from feeling far away from home. But even now, when all the change comes, it's really all the same, you know. So breathe deep, slow footfalls towards the next new year. I'll visit all my safest places to find it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. So open your eyes, you're alive. Another fine night near the ocean. Please don't cry, it's alright. You're always gonna be my darling. Open your eyes, you're alive. Another fine night near the ocean. Please don't cry, it's alright. You're always gonna be my darling. Open your eyes, you're alive. Another fine night near the ocean. Please don't cry, it's alright. You're always gonna be my darling. Open your eyes, you're alive. Another fine night near the ocean. Please don't cry, it's alright. You're always gonna be my darling. Open your eyes, you're alive. Another fine night near the ocean. Please don't cry, it's alright. You're always gonna be my darling. Open your eyes, you're alive. Another fine night near the ocean. Please don't cry, it's alright. You're always gonna be my darling.
We were talking about bad music just prior to this interview starting. Now,
Yeah,
what
we
does
were.
it take to make something really good?
Oh man, I mean that's a conversation that we could have for a long, long time. I think that one part of it is, at least in my opinion, is that there needs to be a certain element of honesty in it. It needs to feel honest and true. And I think that one of the hard things about being a young artist is that a lot of times you don't really know what you believe about stuff, but you also don't really know how to have a voice that sounds honest or that is honest, you know. And so I think that's something that takes growing into. It's funny that honesty is something that takes growing into, but I think that that's true.
Sometimes can't you be too honest?
Oh, that's a good question. What's an example that you think of being too honest?
Where you're being so honest and so self-revealing that you're actually reliving the moment yourself, the struggle.
Yeah, man, I think that as an individual, that's a line that you really have to draw. I mean, this record that I made most recently is pretty revealing. It's a pretty honest and pretty like all out there thing. You know, it's talking about some really personal stuff in my life, and I found that like kind of throwing that out into the world, especially with like kind of the anonymous nature of the internet and stuff, that's a really hard line to walk because people can just comment on it. Like anybody can just throw their opinion into the air about this thing. And that's not something that normally happens. Like you're walking down the street and somebody is like critiquing something really personal about you. That's never going to happen. So actually a good friend of mine just recently, he said, you know, people that make really personal records, he said usually their second record is really anonymous. I thought that was really interesting. He said normally people that make stuff that's really revealing about themselves and personal is the second one's just kind of like pretty run of the mill lyrics and nothing too specific because it like hurts. It's like it's hard, you know, to like put that stuff into the world and just have people see it.
So now you've already laid it out for what your sophomore full length is going to be.
Yeah, it's just going to be like garbly nonsense. Yeah, you'll be excited to hear that one, I'm sure.
Oh, we'll just have another Justin Bieber around.
Yeah, there you go.
Driving snowfall, the winter weather, I'm headed southbound. She held my sweater, she told me, Tyson, you're always leaving me behind. She's holed up north now, for babies, they're in her bloodstream. But she quit waiting when she discovered that I'm always leaving her behind. Told her with sincere intent that the moment was coming that I could dig my fingers in. She held tight in my belly, knowing that I would never stay until I found someone who I could take away. Always leaving, oh, I'm always leaving you behind.
Always Leaving You Behind from Tyson Motsenbocker's first EP, Until It Lands. Let's talk about the opening song from the album. in your name. It talks about God being given credit for answering prayer for essentially unimportant things, but not healing your mother. That must have been a huge struggle to your faith.
Yeah, it was. It was the catalyst to a lot of things. I think that I've had to talk about that song probably more than anything else. And I think it's because it's, there's a lot of things that get criticized or get critiqued in faith or like as a Christian person. And the one that doesn't really get critiqued is the idea that prayer matters and works. And for me, that was like kind of the first thing. That was like the open door. I was like, well, if this is something that seems to not make sense to me right now, that opens the door to like kind of reevaluating and reinspecting everything from the ground up, which was what that album kind of was in a way. It was like me kind of walking back through a lot of things and looking at them in a new light. And yeah, I mean, I think like unimportant, that's a hard word. I think like I mean, in the song it talks about like somebody praying for their basketball team and the team gets better and they think that God did that. Or
that for me fits into unimportant.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and I think that, a lot of things are really important to people, and things that they would pray about. And for me, it was like, I think that it was more like an evaluation of like, if he is not listening to this one thing that's so important to me and that I believe is like important with a, capital I, important, which is just like people suffering. Like that to me is important. And if God is who I thought and think that he is, then like that matters. So yeah, I think that was a thought of like, yeah, why does he bother to do all these other things? Like, why does he change the weather for people? According to them, God changes the weather. He makes it sunny for their church potluck or whatever. He's like working in these schmarmy politicians or like these TV preachers and stuff.
We don't want to get into TV preachers.
Yeah, we don't have to do that. Going through life, there's times when you believe one thing and then there is alternative evidence to the contrary. And those moments, I think, are opportunities in our lives to take those two things and put them in a ring and make them wrestle each other and then see what comes out the other side. I think that's good for us.
Well, something about the song is that it comes across almost as being cynical. I don't know if that was your intention, that was your feeling, or if that was just a byproduct.
Well, I certainly felt cynical at the time, I mean, like sitting there with my mom who was very clearly not going to make it out the other side and hearing all of these voices in my head of what people had said that God had done and sort of looking at God and being like, what's the deal here? Like what's the problem? I mean, there's the line in that song that I think people don't really catch that I think is maybe the gnarliest one in the whole song is that it's talking about like the faith without works is dead verse in James. Mm-hmm. And it's me saying like, this is what the Bible says, that if you believe something but you don't do anything about it, then you aren't real. And so it's me saying that if you choose to stand by idly, then what does that make you? It makes you not real. Like if you're not acting on the things that matter, then you aren't real. Like, and I think that was my reaction to it. Was I know that I know the perspective isn't static between what I see and what you do, which is like that I do not see the nominal world, right? Like I only see my window into it. But if you're not acting, if you don't do anything, then you're not real. I remember writing it down and feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just wrote that down. And then being able to say like, hey, this is what I'm feeling right now. And I do feel very cynical and I'm angry. And like, if God is real and big, then he can take me criticizing him. So I don't know. I think that was really actually a healing process. Like being able to feel cynical about something was a healing thing.
Sounds like the time of David in the Old Testament, ranting against God.
Yeah, and people have said that to me, and he was always one of my favorite characters in the Bible because I felt like he was an honest character too. He was always telling God what he thought about stuff, and God could always take it. He said that David was beloved of God. It's like, and he was the most angry the whole time. It's like kind of awesome. I really like that.
That comes back to the honesty aspect.
Yeah, exactly.
You were loudly living on your final 90 pounds, cross-legged on the south porch, with a Bible in your hand, when I prayed for healing. My father's words rang through the door. Son, I don't think Jesus is in business of healing anymore. Maybe he is occupied with other people's wars, or he's organized militia to fight the war on Christmas, or maybe he's protecting our children from the gays who have promised to destroy this utopia we've made. In his name, in his name, in his name. Build a younger church up tall, saying faith without the action, that isn't anything at all. I know perspective isn't static, what I see and what you do. But if you choose to stand by idly, well, does that make you? I heard that you've been speaking through the men on the TV, and you helped the Dallas Mavericks with their field goal percentage. So when my mother's doctor calls again with more bad news, it's an honest heart's reaction. Oh my God, have you been listening to? Been listening to? Have you been listening to? In your name, in your name, in your name, in your name.
Is that what you were really intending with Letters to Lost Loves? Not to be cynical, but just to be simply honest?
Man, that's a great question. To be honest, I don't know if I knew what I was trying to do when I started. I mean, I knew there was a theme in there. Basically, that like one of those realizations that we come to in our lives is that like the things that we love go away and don't come back. And what do we do with that realization? Does that mean that it's not worth it? Does that mean that like loving things is not worth it, or that like walking through life with a hope is foolish? And I think that was the big question that I was wrestling with the whole time. If this is the case, if the things that we love go away and don't come back, then what does that mean about life in general? Does it mean that what do we do with that? when I did that tour with John Foreman from Switchfoot, he asked me in the van one night we were driving, and he said, "What do you want to say? Like, what do you want your message to be to people?" And he said, "If you're going to grow into a greater audience, then what's the thing that you want to say?" And I told him that I wanted the end result of my music for people to feel like everything was going to turn out okay for them. That there was ultimately a hope in all of these themes that are pretty dark in my music, which is that like we are up against a big wall of darkness, but that it's okay. Like that there's something better on the other side for us. I think that was a really cool moment for us in the van talking about it, and it's a cool moment for me now that I don't want any of these songs to feel like that. And really the themes that make up the majority of the record, I don't want that to be what it's about. I want it to be this feeling that like this is here and you can put that into the world and it's ultimately okay.
Well, we were talking about that form of traveling, but we got to talk about you, because just days after your mother passed away, you left to walk up the coast all the way from San Diego to San Francisco. I know that dealing with grief can be so personal, but did you find that time on the road to be healing for you?
I did, man. I did more than anything else. I tell people all the time that was the best thing that I've ever done. People always ask me like, "Well, did you hitchhike?" And I tell them, I didn't do anything except walk up the road. I mean, I walked about 600 miles. It took me like a little over a month to do it. And I think that like in my life and in just sort of our society now in general, there's just this, everything's so immediate. Everything is within sight. And when something is so beyond sight, like when something is that far away, you're forced to be only where you are in that moment. Because looking any farther than that is just going to kill your spirit. And that was exactly what I needed, was just to be exactly where I was and kind of taking all of those thoughts and feelings. And I actually wrote songs on that walk. I was like just sort of humming melodies or ideas, and that was where a lot of the record came from. So it was incredibly healing. It was the best thing that I've ever done, and I'm really grateful for that time. I'm really glad that I did it.
So every day you're out walking, I guess rain or shine, and you're doing what? Sleeping at the side of the road?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've been driving that stretch of coastline over and over and over for years, and so I know people along the way and stuff. But I mean, it's a big stretch of road, and there's the cities, so I would know somebody in LA, and then I would know somebody in Malibu, and then I would know somebody in Santa Barbara or whatever. But those are still like 4 or 5 or 6 days, and at one point there was like a couple of weeks in there, from Santa Barbara to like Monterey. Those areas were just like, yeah, long stretches of walking, and around 3 p.m. you got to start looking for a place to sleep because you never know what you're going to find. You got an hour of daylight left, so you kind of just find something and hope that nobody comes and wakes you up in the middle of the night and tells you to leave, because that's not fun. So
And did that happen?
a few times. One time I was in Ventura, and I was really, really tired, and I set up my tent in these like kind of these bushes by a resort, and there were all these security guards walking around, and I was sure that they were going to come make me leave. One of the lessons that I learned early on in the trip was that people don't notice anything. That was
Yeah.
that was something that I learned early on, was that like, especially when that's all you're doing is noticing, like when you're just walking and noticing, like you realize that people don't notice anything. And so at one point I was camped out next to this gate, and there's like seriously 5 or 6 security guards, and their whole job is to watch the gate of this resort. And I was camped out like 20 feet from them, and they didn't know that I was there. But in the middle of the night, probably like 1 or 2 a.m., all the sprinklers came on,
Oh, no.
and they were all around me. And I had a tent and stuff. It wasn't like I could ride it out, They were
Right.
underneath the tent and under the rain fly, and they were everywhere. And like they all came on at once, and so I had to get out of there. And then it was in this kind of like concrete dust, and like mud is what all the dirt turned into. And I was like in my socks and trying to get my tent out, and then I pulled it out into the grass, and then all the security guards saw me like with all the sprinklers on, trying to like pull my stuff out of the bushes. And that was a bad one. I ended up just walking all night that night, actually. I just packed everything up and started walking again.
taking this on a personal level, you were left behind after your mother's death. But your song House in the Hills changes the focus of loss. It's got a mother being left behind after her 12 sons and husband are killed during a war. What brought that topic into your mind?
Man, I was in a few years ago, I was in Kansas City, and I went to the World War One museum there. And, I've always been fascinated by sort of the like makeup of wars, like why they started and the political things and why the generals moved the armies where. And when I was in the World War One museum, like I think the one thing that I saw was that they rebuilt the trenches in there. So it's like these big muddy trenches, and it was all these people that all these young people that were younger than me at the time that felt like they were doing something noble and brave. That was like one of the high forms of human existence, was to go off and fight a war for your country. And then they went off to war, and they sat in the mud and like just watched everybody die. There was nothing about it that felt brave or romantic for them. Like all they could do was sit in the mud and wait. And I was just sort of struck in that moment. Somebody said one death is a tragedy and a million deaths is a statistic. I think that's true. If you look at a million deaths, there's no way to personify that, like to make it seem real. But one death is a tragedy. And so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking like, man, okay, if I could boil this war where all these millions of people died down to one person, it's that this one person died in the mud in World War One. And then you multiply that, right? So now that happened in every village to every family across Europe. And then it sort of started to take shape for me, and I was able to like understand the war a little bit better for the first time. One of the things about that song is that you don't know who they are, right? It's just this family. Like they could have been Russians or they could have been Nazis.
Yeah.
Right? Like they could have been anybody. What I think I was realizing as I was writing that song was that like what war means is that a whole bunch of normal people who love their families and are trying to do the best they can, they all die in the mud. And that is really what war means on the biggest level. The smallest level of war is the tactics and like the movements of the generals. Like that's the smallest part. The big part is that all these people die in the mud.
That's right. It's the personal level of it.
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, this is Tyson Motsenbocker, and you've got The Antidote.
She's a strong arm holding on to a house in the hills on the edge of the town. She raised sons, 12 strong boys and 6 sets of twins in a house in the hills. 12 strong boys, good ministers' sons, worked in the soil from the days they were young. Every Sunday, year after year, they listened to their daddy pray. He said, Heavenly Father, be thou today what will be forever, good favor thou lay. And as we forgive upon those who have sinned, bring salvation on all of them. All mothers watch, but not all mothers see the things that are coming, the things that will be. And as it was as she watched over white frozen ground, came a thunder in the heavens, a great buzzing sound. Oh, the mayor was howling out under the roar, the panic and sirens to call in the war. 13 brave men, they are packing their things in a snow-covered house in the hills. Oh, in the night, as the church bells would ring, good tidings for Christmas and longing for spring. The house was a shimmering white watery glow, as a dark hooded figure watched out under his robe. Constantly changing, the seasons would know. 13 red bullets in a box by the door. 13 green ribbons by Bible, by sword. A big empty house. Big empty house. A big empty house in the hills.
I think a lot of people might struggle with the concept of the song Can't Come Home Again. I mean, I'm curious as to when and how a person, comes to that realization that coming home just isn't an option.
Yeah. Oh, man. And I think that, people in cities, I don't think understand that song as well. Because cities are kind of these breathing entities, these organisms. But I grew up in a little town.
Okay, if you say it's little, how little is little?
Man, I'm trying to think about how big it is now. It's called Pullman, Washington. It's about 6 miles from Idaho. So Washington State University is there, which has, if I say any numbers, they're going to be way wrong. So I'm just not even going to do it, especially because I don't know what it is now because the town has changed so much. But basically what happened was that when I was in middle school or high school or something there, a guy developed a chip that was eventually to go in the first iPhones.
Oh.
In this research laboratory there. So when I left for college, the town just exploded. It changed so much. But when I say exploded, I mean in relativity to the size of the town, it just changed so much. And I think what I realized is that it's not just your home that changes when you leave it, because your perception of it, your remembering of home changes. The nature of leaving something that is so embedded in you is that you're going to romanticize it and change it and, move the details. And so the reality of the place is changing, and also the reality of the place in your mind is changing. And those two are they're ships that are traveling apart from one another. And so the moment that you step foot out of town for the first time, out of your hometown, you can never go back again. And I think that's part of growing up, is that realization. You always think that it's going to stay the same when you're a kid. This will stay the same forever. And then when you leave, I think that's one of the first steps of really growing up, is the idea that I think it's the first real face-to-face confrontation with the passing of time.
Right. And of course, people tend to romanticize the past. And it was all so perfect and fine and pristine. But I think you gloss over the negatives.
You totally gloss over the negatives. And I think that's the nature of, sentimentality and nostalgia, is that it's not really like that. It was never really like that. But you can make it like that later. You can only remember the parts that were really great. if you want to. It's easier to miss something that's perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that you can kind of make the past whatever you want. It's the like I walked to school uphill in the snow both ways. It's the same idea. Or this town used to be so much greater. The past was so much greater than the present and the future even. Like I think that's part of that too, is looking backwards is like it's almost like it's a comfort in a place of fear, because you're able to say like I remember that things in my life were good even though the future looks scary.
What the winter brings in this small town is wrapped up in frozen ground. When the spring arrives, walks in sleepy eyes, over and over 1,000 years ago. It's true. It's been a while. It's been a long while. Your eyes miss the grassland, miss the river sand. 'Cause I tried, I made a moment of it all night. Another 100 miles a day to light. I found that we come back home again. I tried, I made a moment of it all night. Another 100 miles a day to light. I found that we come back home again. What the summer brings in this small town is rot and broken ground. When I close my eyes, I can see it now. I can see you standing in the dark. It's true. It's not the same. It's not the same. You smile. It's not the same. It's not the same. No. I tried, I made a moment of it all night. Another 100 miles a day to light. I found that you come back home again. I tried, I made a moment of it all night. Another 100 miles a day to light. I found that you come back home. I tried. I made a moment of it all night. Another 100 miles a day to light. I found that you can't come home again, no. 'Cause I tried, I made a moment of it all night. Another 100 miles a day to light. I found that you can't come home again, no. You can't go home again, no. You can't come home again, no.
Hey, I want to finish up with a talk about, I guess, really what's your rawest and most personal song on the album. What kind of a struggle was it revealing yourself so intimately in your relationship to your mom on the song Honest?
Yeah, man. That was a tough one. Actually, the two songs on the record I almost didn't put on were In Your Name and Honest, because they were the two that I originally didn't write them to be on an album. I wrote them sort of like as therapy or something. I was writing them as remembering. There's this moment when you, like, say for instance, when you take a trip or a vacation and you come back and people say, "How was your vacation?" And they don't really want to know about the vacation. But it was such a big moment in your life, right? They don't really want to know. And I think that's like the first few vacations that you have, you think that people really want to know about it, and you tell them, and then their eyes kind of glaze over, and then you realize that they don't really want to know about it because they have no context for it. You can tell people about another place, and if they have no context for it and they can't smell the place, then it doesn't mean anything to them. And so when I came back from that walk and people knew about it, obviously, and they would say, "What was it like to walk across California?" Or to, like, how are you doing? What was it like to lose your mom? And I knew that they didn't really have any context for it, and I knew that they didn't really want to hear about it. And I don't blame them. It's nothing on them. It's hard. That stuff's hard to hear about, and if you have no context, it's not something you can even grasp. And so Honest was something that I was trying to, I basically said, if I had to ask myself that question, what was it like? Or, like, what does it mean now? What would the answer be? And I couldn't come up with an answer. The things that were lost, or the things that it meant, were just these lists. So I started writing down lists of things that it meant. Like, when I got to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco after that walk, I figured out that nothing had really changed. I just understood myself a little better. That was all that had changed. And then, so it's me asking the question, well, then what do you understand better? And then it's a list of things that were lost. It's like these things that my mom used to do and say, and little gifts that she bought for me. It's just like, it's a pair of jeans and it's a rude awakening. It's all these, like, lists of things that came to my mind. And then the second time is me saying that, like, that I found that's like going back to what we were talking about with there being hope in the end. Is like, I found there's a humor and a long and fond goodbye. Like, there's something smiling in tragedy. And the second list is me trying to see the hope in it. My mom left me one of her ski passes. She was like a ski patrolman and stuff. And she left me one of her ski passes, like her season's passes from 1988. And it's her smiling really silly in this ridiculous hat. And she left it for me in this box of things that she kind of left for me. And it was such a funny thing to leave in there. And I felt like it was a message from her saying that there is always a joke. There is always a happiness and a humor in the things that are lost, because it's a memory. It's a good memory. And so the last line of that song, it says that it's a photograph folded in my wallet, which is that picture that she left for me, to remind myself that what she left is only growing bigger over time.
Said I'd walk to San Francisco after everything was done. I thought the noise and moving busy kept my mind from really knowing what was gone. When I finally saw it closing, all those miles above the bay, well, I was only standing closer to the man I tried to lose along the way. But if I'm being honest, as if I'm being honest, then I would tell him that it's a picture book, it's a hospital gown, it's an aspen tree in the summer breeze. found that there's a humor in an old and fond goodbye. As if the early passing was a door that she could look through with a smile. So if I'm being honest, as if I'm being honest, then I would tell her that it's a pair of jeans. It's a rude awakening. It's a fine life lived in the privilege of standing there in the afterlight. It's a photograph folded in my wallet to remind myself that what she left is only growing bigger over time.
It's always great to hear from an artist like Tyson Motsenbocker, somebody who isn't afraid to cover difficult or emotional topics in their music. That song, Honest, is a great example of that, and it comes from Tyson's new full-length album, Letters to Lost Loves. Well, during our next episode of The Antidote, our guest and I discover that technology can sometimes be a curse. We're met by the voice of Creed, the legendary Scott Stapp. You got to join us to find out what happened, and you'll be able to enjoy some really awesome music from Scott. And remember, anytime you want to hear more of The Antidote, head to our website, theantidoteradio.com. Plus, you can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, iTunes, and also on our new YouTube channel. We've still got a little bit more coming, so we've got the song Always from Tyson Motsenbocker and the last of our chat with him. And thanks for listening to The Antidote, and we'll see you again next week. What do you think listeners will draw out of Letters to Lost Loves?
That's a good question, man. And I'm kind of discovering that as we go along. You know, the record's been out for a few weeks now, and there's a big list of the things that people get out of it. And I think the hardest part about it is that it deals with, you know, such heavy content matter that the things that I get back from people, it's really heavy content. You know, it's people that have lost and have suffered a lot. And always, I think the thing that they say is that this was a comfort for me. It was a comfort for me in this time. I had a guy send me a message over Instagram the other day, and he said, you know, I just want you to know that I lost someone really, really dear to me, and your record's been a big comfort for me. And I like kind of looked into it. I found the story of what had happened in the news on the internet, and it was just heartbreaking for me. It was horrible. I was up at like 2 a.m. reading this story on the news of what had happened to this guy's family. And I think reading that and seeing that, like, man, this is so awful. Like, what this person's going through is worse than what I went through. And the fact that what happened to me was a comfort for him, that is such a gift to me, you know. And that's always my hope. I've told people that I don't want this record to be about my situation, because the specifics of the situation are ultimately just a drop in the bucket of human experience, and that I want it to be something that's pointing towards the greater hope in the human experience. It's something that's a lot bigger than me in this story, and that's the hope of what people get out of it. And I think that, at least for the most part, that's the experience that they've had with it. So,
well, Tyson, I read somewhere on your blog where you had talked about interviewing yourself before an imaginary audience and giving back the answers. I don't think you need any practice doing interviews, man. This has been a really, really great conversation.
Oh, thanks, Dave. I had a wonderful time chatting with you, man.
Tyson Motsenbocker has been here on The Antidote. Thanks again, man. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. One of these days when I'm over on your neck of the woods, we'll grab a beer together.
Totally.
It reminded me the mornings, light from the snow, years old. I see her when I'm sleeping, surrounded by my friends. Where the singing and the laughter in the evening never ends. So I look in her eyes, tell her all that I know what to say. It was always, you. It was always, you. Reminding me the mornings alone in the rain, on the coast of California, haven't left her side again. So I look in her eyes, yes, I look in her eyes. Oh, because it was